comes to ageing, it's not how old you are, but how you are old that matters. So how do you keep living life your way when it makes sense to access services that can make a difference? Brought to you by Uniting AgeWell, the Aging Ideal aims to start conversations to cut through the noise and provide people with a greater understanding of this important chapter of life.
It had its moments of concern. There's a little phrase I've often said, don't let it beat you. Whatever it is, don't let it beat you. Stick to your guns, as it were.
Welcome to the first episode of The Aging Ideal, brought to you by Uniting AgeWell. I'm your host, Jacinta Parsons. It is forecast that by 2050, the number of over 65s is likely to double what it is today, and the number of people over the age of 85 is expected to quadruple. With more people living in their later years, what does a good life look like as we age? What are the barriers we face and the positive changes we can make as individuals and as a society that will make a difference? After a royal commission into aged care quality and safety and the recent tabling in federal parliament of the bill for a new Aged Care Act, there is clearly a will to empower older people to exercise their rights when it comes to accessing services, while creating a sustained future for the aged care sector so it can meet this growing demand. We'll be talking about some of these changes in later episodes. There's still a lot of living to do after 65, and a lot this generation has to offer. However, circumstance, state of mind and ill health can be limiting factors, particularly when we ask people to be resilient and stay positive in a society that has tended to underestimate the capability and contribution of older people. So how do we change the status quo and make sure people have the opportunity to live their best life, no matter their age? This podcast is an opportunity to have open and frank conversations about ageing with everyday people who live life their way. We'll bring you experts in the health and aged care space, ideas that challenge some traditional thinking, and sometimes to confirm what we already know. Growing older can be a confronting reality for some, while for others, it's a time to enjoy life. Every person has a different story and different challenges. This can mean the experience of ageing comes with big decisions and change that may be unexpected. It might feel like life is not going to plan. Merv Stanton is a retired minister in his late 90s, and his story brings one perspective. Living in Tasmania, his wife Margaret, who had Parkinson's disease, moved to a Uniting AgeWell residential community in 2012. Merv helped Marg through a difficult transition period, driving hours from their hometown to Hobart to visit her, before selling up and finding himself a unit in a suburb close by so he could visit Margaret each day. He was there with her so often that he began a busy schedule of volunteering, from working in the gardens to hosting quiz nights. Merv continued to volunteer up until last year. His story is incredibly special as we see how personal circumstances led to an important role impacting others in a positive way. But first we start with Merv and the process of finding Marg the support she needed. When did you start to realise that Margaret needed more care than you could give her?
I brought her into Uniting AgeWell in 2012, but I would say it would be a good 6 or 7 years before that we began to realise something was going wrong. Margaret became ill with Parkinson's and osteoporosis, and it became obvious that she needed more care than I could give her. I'd looked after her for quite some time. She was having a number of accidents, falling and hurting herself, and I'd been told by a doctor, you can't do it anymore. She needs to go into a home.
Tell me about the experience of finding her the place at Queenborough Rise. Did you do much of that consultation with your family, with your children? Were they really part of the decision-making?
Oh yes, quite definitely, yes. They were. Everything that was done together as a family. and not just either by me. Of course, it couldn't have been done just by Margaret. The first home we took her to, of course, she didn't like that at all. It wasn't any fault of the home. It was the whole idea of being away from home. The second one was the only place available 90 kilometres away from where we lived. Well, that was quite a business, going backwards and forwards to her. What we had done, though, in the meantime, we'd come down to Hobart to her two daughters and looked around a couple of the homes. And my daughters both liked Queenborough Rise because my daughter is a botanist in the university, was just round the corner. But there was no place vacant. And then I got a phone call unexpectedly, giving me 48 hours to get Margaret to Queenborough Rise. There was a room spare. So it was a mad rush. And she, poor thing, didn't have time to think out what it was all about. My son and I, between us, took her down in the car from Wynyard to Hobart, which is a 4-hour drive, and put her in the room at Queenborough. What she did find about Queenborough as we went along was that they gave very good medical help and very good social help. To be honest, for the first month or two, because I had to continue travelling back between Wynyard and Hobart, I wasn't able to see her as much as I would like to have in the home. But eventually I managed to sell my home, and I got a unit, strangely enough, at Guildford Young, the other nursing home, but one of their private units. So I moved down to Hobart. There, I think she got the idea for a while that might mean she could come and live with me in my unit. But that would be physically impossible, medically impossible. But she settled down quite happily then, because I could visit her every day from then on.
Merv, it's an incredible story, not only of Margaret's and how she needed to transition into this new life, but also you, Merv, having to be so resilient to ensure her safe passage. What was it like for you to go through that enormous upheaval?
It had its moments of concern, but there's a little phrase I've often said, don't let it beat you. Whatever it is, don't let it beat you. Stick to your guns, as it were.
How about her autonomy? How did she go as she started to get used to her new environment? Did she feel like she was able to cope with that change?
I think so. Certainly she always appeared so. I think once she got herself more used to the fact that she was there permanently, that took a little while. And she became more and more involved with the other residents. That was a great help.
And thus begins quite an adventure for Merv. Not only was it a complete change of life and lifestyle for him, but a new phase of doing something that he and Marg had done all their lives, volunteering and giving back to the community. And it was sparked very simply by Marg talking about the garden she could see each day from her room.
True. When she came into Uniting AgeWell, one of the things that I realised that she needed a break after lunch, a bit of time to herself. So I used to go out into what appeared to be the garden outside. It was mostly hedges in those days, and thought I'd work out there. One of her comments was, there isn't any colour in the garden, which is true. It's all very green, but she had been a gardener and quite used to a lot of colour about. So I used to take pot plants down and put them outside the window. And so bit by bit, I took over the section of garden straight outside my wife's room and put flowers, bulbs and such things. I was always getting quite good comments, encouraging comments, and felt that this was worth doing. Well, Queenborough Rise has 5 separate units, but these all have houses or rooms in them. But they make up 3 gardens. My one little garden to start with soon became 3. And what has always thrilled me, and still does, has been the number of people who come out and comment, visitors as well as residents, on how lovely the garden is. And so began the garden as I've got it today.
It's a full-time job. I love it. It actually makes me really want to sort of pursue that further, because we talk a lot about ageing well. It sounds like you have really understood what that means in your life. What does it mean to you to age well?
To age well, I think, first of all, means you've got to look very carefully at the way you live, particularly as you get older, that you don't drink too much, smoke too much. Better if we don't smoke at all, to be quite honest. But to be living well, I think, is always to be ready and willing to be of help to anybody if you possibly can, because you gain more joy out of helping a person than ever you really expect.
Of course, Merv's life took a different turn, and he managed to find what brought him joy by caring for his wife Margaret. There are so many ways that elders stay active and also give back to the community. Let's hear from Stanley, Elizabeth and Bill.
I'm Stanley Lewin. I'm aged 91 and I live by myself because I'm a widower. I'm a retired teacher and do a lot of international travelling. I do stool crossing duties twice a day, so I'm looking after about 500 children. And then I go cycling at the local gym for an hour twice a week. And then I come to the men's shed, and that's my week. I'm out of the house 5 days a week with my various activities.
Elizabeth, in my head, I can still do everything. And you go to do something and you think, no, you can't. That was the hardest thing for me to accept. And slowly, you get used to it and you find other ways of getting around to do things.
My name is Bill Kelleher. I don't seem to have enough time in the day to do all the things I want to do. That's the main thing. That's just me these days. I try to keep myself busy with physical activity and mental activity and doing things and maybe helping other people a little bit as well, which is good.
Loretta Simmons lives at a retirement village. She's quite extraordinary. She's been honoured with an OAM, a 2023 recipient, and continues to volunteer at Golden Days Radio after 30 years. But transitioning to a new phase of life post-80 and making the decision to move to a new home and community can have its challenges. How do you age well? What does that mean to you?
Well, ageing well is to be very mindful of oneself for a start, and that is mind and body, keeping oneself fit. Good health is one of the areas in which we must focus and really look after ourselves. I think there's a couple of areas, Jacinta, in ageing for all of us: health and finances. If you're financially secure and you own your own home, it's fine. But many women especially have not, unfortunately, got that. And their circumstances, especially now, we find it's rather sad. Good health is the other thing. I'm very much aware of my body. I liken myself to a used car. There's so many spare parts, you know. I can't trade it in. No one wants it. But I have to keep it going. I have to keep the motor running. And that motor is not only physical, but it's psychological and mental as well.
It very much is, isn't it? It's like keeping fit. I'd love to know from you about moving into the retirement community. When did the decision come about and how hard was it, or what did you go through to make that decision?
I moved from our family home after 47 years and moved into independent living. And you move away from your neighbours, your neighbourhood, and the area in which you've established yourself over that time, over the period, and then you have to start really all over again in many ways. It really came about finance again. I needed to look at the future and therefore selling the house. And we did have a mortgage on the house. The maintenance of the house was getting a bit too much. As age comes about, you can't do the same things around your home that you always did. So I did have a look for a smaller residence to move to, and one of my sisters found the Uniting AgeWell village where I'm now settled and said it looks rather nice. It's very small. It's not a great big glitzy village, and you might be interested in having a look at it, which I did. I sort of went into a little bit of research about it before I made the decision. Uniting AgeWell is an older village. It's not a new establishment, but it's quite charming. It's very nice neighbours. And my first visit there, I thought to myself, I think I could live here.
Was it an emotional decision for you? Oh, and did you lean on your family when you were?
No, not really. I've always been very independent and made my own decisions. And in this case, this is a big decision to make from moving from one's home to another location and a completely different environment altogether. I have to live there and I have to spend the rest of my life there. My family doesn't. So I have to be the one to make that final decision. I would suggest that people do their homework. They should research out and just see if it's suitable for them. Certainly if that particular area in which they're moving, does it still bring to them the quality of life and the comfort that they have been familiar with in their years up until that point. If you move too far away from family and friends, it can be a bit daunting for me. It had to be within throwing distance of Golden Days Radio and my other organisations. And also public transport was another factor that I had to look at. I have Plan B in place where the day will come when I may not be able to drive. So therefore I've got to look at how I'm going to still remain independent, and that's something I'm very passionate about, is to remain independent and remain in independent living. And that door of the residential care is there as a prompt to keep myself moving.
What about the retirement community? Did you have preconceptions about what it might be like before you actually moved in?
I think, like in younger years, you look toward older people and you just think, well, I'll never be old. I don't feel old, Jacinta.
This is exactly what I hear, because their inside of us is very much young.
I'm ageless. I'm not an ageing statistic. And that's another thing that I'm very passionate about. I have an identity and I don't want to lose that identity. Once that's gone, once you lose your identity, you fade away. And you fade away not only from within yourself, but in the eyes of those around you. But I like to think that I'm ageless, that I will continue to make my own decisions, be independently mobile, and be aware of my circumstances, manage my affairs. And, of course, above all, I have a beautiful family, grandchildren, and I've got 7 great-grandchildren. I need to be an example, a mentor, and that grandmother, that great-grandmother to those children, and encourage them, inspire them, and uplift them even, and have them look forward to my visits to them.
So when you finally made that move, you packed your bags, you packed the truck, and you found yourself in this retirement community, did it surprise you?
It was a bit of a shock because I felt that I had lost a bit of my own decision-making and independence. That strengthened as the years passed, but you have to conform. It's a communal living and you must regard other people, even though one has neighbours in the street. Once you close your gate and your door, you're in your own home. It's not quite the same in independent living, but you adjust and it really can be quite pleasant. There's certainly a sense of security in numbers, as they always say, and also you're cared for in other areas where you don't have to be concerned about maintenance, for example, which is a big thing when you're living on your own. and the overheads are covered by a fee that covers many things that you don't have to worry about paying the bills, paying the rates and the insurance and so on. Somebody else does that. And then if you're in need, if you need help, that help is there. Uniting AgeWell have a very big facility where they offer all manner of services and help if you wish to do it on a day care basis, like going for podiatry, for example, or home help as well. And there's a safety net, I think, under you.
Was that a part of what you were thinking about when you joined this retirement community? Like what connections or friendships there might be?
Yes, of course. You naturally wonder about your neighbours and you get to know each other, and that's usually through afternoon teas and activities that are held, and it's really very pleasant, and you can do as much as you like or as little as you like. There are times when I do wonder if there's anyone living in the same place. It's very quiet, but then people come together. We have barbecues and we have films and weekly get-together. It's quite pleasant, I think. And as one ages, you cannot live in isolation. And it's more important to think of those years that families are growing up and they're busy, young people. My family are in the country. My sister's near me and brother. But people are busy. So you need to make your own pathway and entertainment. And your neighbours are the ones that you see every day, not your family, usually. And in the case of where I'm living, that's how it is. And where I have chosen to spend probably the rest of my life in independent living in a retirement village has become more and more appealing as well, for all the reasons that I've mentioned. It's security, and to be safe is something that really must be taken into account.
That's a wonderful distinction, isn't it? Not just security, but a sense of safety and a feeling that you also belong somewhere as well. We all want that through our entire lifetime.
Of course. As I mentioned, isolation or being alone, there are many, many people in our community who are isolated, marginalised and are lonely. We find that through our radio station. We're very much connected with our community, and over the years we have found there's a very high level, especially during COVID, great difficulties, especially for men who are living on their own. For many older people, managing to live on their own is difficult as well. Just take sorting your tablets out. You seem to get more and more tablets. You have more tablets than the main meal. And for many people, just to sort out your medications and sort out the various day-to-day things that you need, I think you need a bit of help sometimes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to be in residential care. You can move into independent living and still have your independence, but the help's there, the safety net is there, that health pathway is there, and being fit. Most places have a gym, as we do, and it's, I think, a decision to look at just the change, the evolution that takes place in life as one ages. It's very hard to let the strings go of where you've spent most of your life, but life changes.
That's right. I want to ask you the big question about ageing. What do you think about getting older? That you now, where you are, you've had time to settle in after the transition, you're in a particular place. What's been your perspective on this experience?
It's just come upon me. When I was 79, I was younger and I was treated in a different way. I travelled last year and my travel insurance was massive because I'd only just moved over to the big 80. Before that, the quote was quite different. And that was interesting. It's a matter of perception. It's a matter of how you're viewed as you age. I say the 3 I's of individuality, independence, and your identity. As you age, you fear losing your identity. I think that's why it's important to stay connected in community activities, doesn't matter what it is, but don't live alone. Don't close that door and shut yourself off. You must be connected with community. And we live in a wonderful community, and there is something there for everybody.
Tell me more about that moment when you hit the big 80, which is obviously just a number. But as you point out, the world around you does start to shift and change with their perception of you.
I think it does, and it's probably a psychological fence. That's what it would be. And it was a hurdle. It's like a steeplechase. You're heading across the field and suddenly this wall is in front of you that you hadn't really planned for in many ways. It was there, you never thought about it. But I suddenly was 80, but other people made more of it than I thought of it. And I was surprised at that. The other thing is that I find that people tend to want to assist you physically, help you, which is very kind. It's very kind. Your identity changes. You're expected to be old. For me, I have found it to be just a little bit off-putting.
Ageism, like many prejudices, is based on assumption, stigma and lack of understanding. Loretta herself said earlier that she still feels young, and there are so many older people who say the same, that while the exterior might be waning, their spirit is decades younger. Here's Bill and Elizabeth again on whether they believe ageism is an issue in our society.
I think for some people that's probably very much the case, and with just the pace of life perhaps these days and the push of everything and all the technical aspects of social media and everything, and the focus on things other than perhaps people and being a bit empathetic to how people are seeing things and feeling, etc. Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Very much so. I went into my bank. I was the first one in there, and 3 people came behind me, and one of the girls working at the bank totally ignored me. So I just stood there. And in the end, I turned to walk out, because I thought, if I say anything, it's not very nice. And then one of the men came from one of the booths and he helped me. And I said, I won't come back to this branch ever again.
As we wrap up the first episode of The Ageing Ideal, there's another layer that Merv reveals to me. Something which, along with his deep faith, has been an inspiration, a guide, certainly in his later years, that is most fittingly poetic.
What, to a large extent, has always encouraged me is one of Tennyson's poems. It's called Ulysses. What it's based on is Ulysses finds himself as a king having to retire, passing over to his son, and he's now an older man. And he suddenly begins to realise old age is still worth something. You can do something with it or not. And a couple of the comments that come straight from that poem. Old age hath yet its honour and its toil, still something there to go looking for. And even as we get older, you might think, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that. But we can do something. And so he ends up with this particular phrase. And this is, I've always tried to live by it. Strive to seek, to find, and not to yield. Strive to seek, to find, and not to yield.
You've been listening to The Ageing Ideal, a podcast for Uniting AgeWell, produced by Sound Cartel. Subscribe free wherever you listen to podcasts.